I might be delving into a bit of Guild Wars 2 today. So, it's been a while. Many months. But before I do that, let's get into some business. This is video number 3 of the Building a Campaign Step-by-Step video series, which will be a video series that is 5 videos long. Each video listening to me ramble and cover 2 bullet points. Today, we are taking a look at bullet points number 5 and 6. A small fight, which could lead further, and the bullet point that talks about social and exploration. The two of the three pillars of 5th edition D&D adventure, with combat being the other one. We are dealing with the theme of undead, the theme of necromancy, built around the inspiration, which was bullet point number 1, covered in video 1. I looked on my shelf and I saw this thing that you see on screen here, a Dracolich. I did mention that I don't want to lean too much into dragons specifically, the dragon aspect of the Dracolich, but more so the undead part, the necromancy part, okay? Bullet point number 5, a small fight. This applies, if any of these were to apply at a specific session, this one applies the most early on, especially session number 1. And the reason why you want to have a small fight, notice I said a small fight, and yes, it could lead further. It can have great impact in your overall story, in the entirety of your campaign. But begin with a small fight, something that if maybe you're a new DM, you can handle it. Maybe just use some familiar monsters. It's going to be smaller than something at the highest tiers of gameplay, because if you do this early on, session 1, your players are low level, assuming you are beginning your campaign with level 1, maybe level 2 characters at most, right? There's not a lot of options. Your players don't have action surges and 4 attacks and magic items that they need to look through and see what they do and things that trigger at certain points and all so on. You know, you're not fighting monsters necessarily. You shouldn't be. With legendary action, so you're going to go off turn. The fight is naturally going to be simpler because it's happening early on in the game. But the reason why you want to have a small fight, something you can, as the DM, prepare quickly, you can wrap your head around. You don't have to have a small fight equal a fight that needs to be wrapped up in 15 minutes. If you're enjoying it, read the energy at the table. If you and the players are enjoying the fight, it can chew up an hour and a half of your gameplay. But the fight just needs to be simple. That's what I mean by a small fight. And the reason why you want to do this early on, campaign or session number 1, you want to give the players at your table ample opportunity to see if they even like their characters. If you really look down at your character sheet, 90% of what's there are all these different buttons, right? Abilities, bonuses, plus signs, bubbles, boxes, things you fill in. 90% of those only apply in combat. You can play any character with a very pacifist sort of mentality. I don't think you're going to enjoy it. I don't think 5th edition is built for that. It does not mean you cannot focus on social and exploration, which we'll talk about in the next bullet point. I have had many sessions where there's no fight at all, right? If there's just things that need to get done, this is definitely for another video as well. I've got a lot of fuel coming from these videos. If there's something that needs to get done and it doesn't, and it almost feels like combat is going to pause, delay, or throw a wrench, or provide a little bit of an obstacle in the flow of the story, we're not fighting that session, okay? But what we're talking about is why you need to fight. A small fight, a simple fight in session 1. You need to give your players a very immediate opportunity to see if the character they built is something they're going to stick with. It's so much easier for them to just come to the table next session, session 2, with a brand new character. They haven't invested into the character very much yet. No one at the table has. I mean, that character has been with the group for 3 hours, real time. They haven't ingrained themselves into the story where they've met all sorts of NPCs and they've had some sort of world level impact yet. And there's various factions that are at the PC's throats because of that character. When that character's gone, is the faction still at the character's throats? Or can you say, okay, that faction's no longer a problem because that character went away? You know what I mean? So they haven't woven themselves into the tapestry of your grandiose world. So if you do that early on, a player might be like, oh, you know what? I feel like I'm sitting back, and every time you tell me it's my turn to act, I just don't know what to do. I have too many options. This character's too complex. Let me just go with a Berserker Barbarian. Can I just play next session? Can I just come with a Berserker Barbarian? Let them find that out early on. Let the wizard realize that evocation is not going to work because they didn't realize how, or evocation is maybe the best specialization because they didn't realize that in choosing abjuration or divination, which are awesome, the rogues, or there's a couple of party members that are just sort of reckless and they just always jump into the fray. And now they're never going to be able to cast the fireballs and the area effect spells they want. So maybe that wizard realizes, can I make a change, dude? Please, Miss DM? Can I just choose evocation specialization instead? I'd like to shape my spells because those two jackahoos, whatever you want to call them, keep jumping into the combat ahead of time and they don't give me time to area effect. But that small fight establishes this up front. The other time that you want to include a small fight, make sure that a small fight is a part, whatever part, however length of time it takes. You want to have a small fight as a part of your current session or upcoming session is whenever there's a new character coming into the mix. Or perhaps even a new NPC that you think is going to stick around. Baldur's Gate Avernus had that, right? Like you had the flying elephant person, you had slobber chops, whatever, right? When this new character, he's playing a goblin now, came in at level 10 with a brand new character and his warlock left, I wanted to have some sort of a small combat. Just a way for him to roll some dice and see, especially at level 10, because there's a lot of moving parts now. I wanted him to have ample opportunity to see if this new character was going to be something that flowed in combat quite well. This is not always to say that combat is, by and large, the most important of the three sort of tiers or pillars of gameplay, with social and exploration being the other two. But combat's a very important one, and 5th edition is heavily, look at the damn character sheet, you can see it. 5th edition is very heavily designed towards combat. If your character does not have something to bring to the table in combat, and does not bring you excitement in combat, separate though, and understand and respect that it doesn't mean they need to have importance and value in all sorts of combat. You may not thrive in underwater combat. You may not thrive in combat versus ranged attackers or things that fly. You may not thrive in combat when you're stuck in hallways. Look at Overwatch or something like this, right? There are certain characters that just are better depending on the map design. Think of it the same way. It doesn't mean your character needs to have the most value in every sort of combat. But if your character is not exciting to you when it comes time for the DM to say roll initiative, you need to build a new character. That's sort of the foundation of 5th edition gameplay, okay? So make sure you have a small fight very early on to give players, get their feet wet, try out their abilities, see if they like it. Include small fights in any session when a player is bringing a new character to the table. And the little part in parentheses there, that small fight could lead further. It does offer you ample opportunity as a dungeon master to extrapolate and expand on that small fight. And maybe the small fight gave the players and characters a chance to see what they could do, but the conflict was not necessarily resolved by who killed who. Maybe the bad guy got away, and now this bad guy becomes a reoccurring enemy, or perhaps even a villain. Perhaps the PCs learn more information. Maybe the small fight is a part of that first 5 minutes of the session, and that's what gets things going. Okay, so there it is. 1, 2, 3. Let's look at bullet point number 6, social and exploration. In the beginning of the player's handbook, I'm just going to read it to you here. I can pop it on screen, but this is an important one. Here we go. Audible or something. Adventurers can try to do anything their players can imagine, but it can be helpful to talk about their activities in 3 broad categories: exploration, social, interaction, and combat. Let me go over that last part. In 3 broad categories: exploration, social interaction, and combat. The social and separate these two. This could almost be 2 bullet points. Where are you going in your game during your session socially, right? And what I mean is those 3 pillars of adventure, what parts of your current storyline, okay, are you going to poke at that scream to the social aspect? Because number one, when you focus on the social aspect, you are now grabbing hold of the characters that maybe aren't as skilled in combat, that maybe aren't min-maxing, that aren't building their character. They didn't build their character with the intention that I need to be a juggernaut of death in combat. I don't have as much to offer. We talked about this, there's something I'm excited about in combat. I feel like I have value. I bring something to the group, like a bard or something like that, right? That brings tremendous value to the group. But maybe they're a character that offers more value outside of combat, like after it's happened, in sort of reparations, in the healing, in the recovery process. Yes, they can heal mid-combat. You're going to need to, of course, right? To keep your tanks up, your fighters alive. But maybe they offer something more that way. But let's just say it's a character that has really leaned into a very strong backstory. And you'll notice we're dealing with one of those bullet points coming up in a subsequent video. They have a very heavy backstory. And for whatever reason, they're just not too keen on combat. And maybe the player is just not too fond of it. They enjoy the imaginative, conversational aspect of D&D. Make sure you include something for those players as well. And maybe you're just better at that. Maybe you're Matt Mercer in that, I think one thing, the strength of Critical Role and Matt Mercer, social is their strength. They have interesting characters, but they are not the default sort of go-to gurus of 5th edition combat. They mess things up. They don't get the rules right. Doesn't matter. Yeah, the terrain and what they present visually on the table is obviously the production value is high. But the strength of Matt Mercer as a DM, I think, leans more into this particular pillar of gameplay. Or these two, but definitely the social. The conversation, the voice work, right? Each NPC they're memorable. His mannerisms, his quirks, how he explains it, his descriptive nature in exploration, and how exhaustive he goes into what something feels, tastes, touch, smells like. It's not combat. Right? We don't go and look to Critical Role and be like, oh my gosh, they have the most compelling, interesting combats. No, I've seen better. So make sure, regardless of where your strength is, you don't have to lean into the ones you're not very good at. That's okay. You'll get better at them. But each session, make sure you include some social aspect to your game, something that leans into and grabs hold of those characters that are really focused, those players that really like social encounters. They like just talking. Like, we don't need to fight here. We're about to roll initiative, but these monsters are intelligent. There's an opportunity to parlay here. Talk your way out of this. And that is one good way to do that. Present something from the obvious pillar, which is combat, that the players need to quickly learn and discern that this should not be handled through combat. We can fight, but we shouldn't. There's going to be consequences. We can fight in the middle of this town, but the rules at the front gate said we're going to get arrested. So now our campaign is going to get derailed. Our mission is going to be put on hold because we're going to be thrown in jail. We're going to go through the system of courts. Imagine something like Ravnica where you go in with the Azoria Senate or the Boros Legion. Right? It's going to provide a huge hiccup if you fight. You can fight. You can start a fight in the bar. That thing in the corner is evil. And you might be able to beat it. But maybe that's not the best time. Therein comes in the other 2 pillars of gameplay. So that is a good way you can provide ample opportunity. Use combat as a backup if you can't figure out how to weave through the social aspect, or your players aren't giving you anything and they're not giving you a lot of feedback. They're not talking much. They seem a little shy or reserved. Okay, well, Hulk smash the door then and roll initiative. Let's just kill the guys in the room and take what you need instead of trying to talk your way through it. But if you do have a thief, someone with a glib tongue, a mastermind, someone that can forge some paperwork, make a lot of insight checks. You have a charismatic paladin that can use persuasion and whatnot. That is how you can rally troops to your side. Get people that maybe didn't agree with you to agree with you enough to let you into the location and blah. You don't have to Hulk smash everything. So offer some aspect of social. And this is in every session. But then take these 10 and always, and when you have enough sessions stacked on top of each other and you've been playing for 7 months, really start thinking through, is this campaign overall leaning to a very heavy combat? There's not been a lot of social. Let's start including more of that. Let's have a couple of sessions, maybe not the whole session, because again, you want to go through all 3 of these pillars in one session. That way you fill sort of the umbrella of all aspects of gameplay. But you might sit there and say, I'm going to start putting a lot more hours of time and energy into just role play. Things where either there's no fight, no opportunity to fight, or it's definitely not to the player's advantage to fight. And the last one, of course, is exploration. Don't just gloss over travel. Don't just gloss over the journey from A to B and say, okay, you arrive in B. You need to run everything through a fine-tooth comb, and if that comb was labeled something, it's labeled pacing and excitement. If it's boring to travel from A to B, gloss over it. Okay, took you about 3 days, expend some resources, but you arrive in B, and you're going to meet with the king. And you're going to discuss what's going on with this war in the north, that you need to convince the king to back off a little bit because it's causing problems for your faction friends down below in the south. Okay? But if you've got something planned, and notice how we talked about this every time already, everything keeps weaving into one another. If you've got something planned that leans into the inspiration of undead, or selling the uniqueness of your world, that Frost Realm thing, and you say between A and B, there's some ice caves that really scream to these players and tell them, dude, this is a really cold world. We never saw those sort of frozen creatures in that other campaign. This is where the Viking clans of the north really live. Then use the exploration pillar to uncover that. That's all just to say, those 2, social and exploration, use those pillars of gameplay. Use all 3 aspects, combat, social, and exploration, but mostly social and exploration because combat's easy. Use those other 2 pillars of gameplay to weave in and out of the other parts that we've already covered, the first 5 minutes of the session, the world's uniqueness and inspirations, to start introducing other elements. Like, that's a very awesome creative exercise, and it's a way that you can create so much excitement and interest in your worlds, in your stories, in your adventure. This applies to one-shots and campaigns. Introduce a villain in combat. What does that look and feel like? Round 1 takes out the tank. Whoa! That gives a lot of information about the villain, right? It tells the players, we're not ready for this guy. He's taking our highest hit point, best AC guy, and he's dropping him. Heaven forbid that he hits our ranger in the back. But also introduce the villain socially. He's sitting at the top of a throne, or on the throne, and he's flanked by enough guards where your PC's like, yeah, we cannot start a fight here, this is TPK. And you just establish how much of an asshole he is. But then exploration. What has the villain done to the environment that made that previously simple journey from village to the city treacherous, a pain in the ass? Okay, the villain is some ice god, and that asshole, he froze everything. It was just treacherous. We should have been there in 2 days. It took us 2 weeks. Use the other pillars to introduce the various exciting parts of your game. And most importantly, as I said, you'll do that because you want to include all players. Not everyone is going to play to the strength of combat. So that's it. Small fight stuff and social and exploration. I'll see you guys in the next video.